Yo guys, and welcome back for another Blue Protocol Star Resonance video. So at reset today, the new Adept Trials became available, and there's some pretty cool things about it, as well as some pretty strong rewards. So let's talk about it. To start it off, the event is pretty similar to a roguelike. If you've ever done anything like that, whether it be, Mega Bonk or Risk of Rain, there's lots of examples of this where you go around and you collect buffs and then you defeat waves of enemies and then you also fight some bosses. Now in this game it's a little bit different obviously, but it's pretty much the same idea. One thing that we did notice that we did kind of struggle-ish with is that sometimes you're not guaranteed to get a tank or a healer. So I experienced myself getting 2 tanks, which also was a little bit weird, and then the tank left, or one of the tanks left. So then we were down a man running it as a 4-man squad, and then someone from my chat had an experience where they did not have a tank at all. So depending on how your group is set up is going to really change how far you can get. Now personally, I would recommend doing the best that you can to actually make a group for this. That way you have a proper setup of people who are geared and have a general idea of what they're doing. From looking at the damage, it became really apparent who was building their character correctly and who was not. With the right setup, you can increase your damage by 10, 20, maybe even more than that times your original kind of DPS. So it's pretty significant what you can do, and the numbers kind of just start scaling out of control the further that you go and the bigger buffs that you get. Now, to kind of start off explaining the buffs, it's probably good to have a second and talk about how the rules work. So there's a couple of different options here. On the right hand side, there are a couple of abilities that you can choose from. Now these are a special ability that you can essentially equip, but you can only have one of them. And then the guy at the end in blue, again, is the column on the right. He is the one that you talk to and then you use to upgrade that ability that you did purchase. Now, the buffs on the left are entirely different and they stack, so they aren't unique. You can buy as many of them as you want, and in fact, you really want to make sure you find a good combination of this that you do like. Some of them were really big and powerful, like 50% attack. Some of them were increasing and doing cool things based on lucky hits. Some of them were just stat increases, like luck increased by 30% of your mastery and things like that. So it really depends on what it is that your class goes for, but I would say try to lean into whatever your class normally goes for. So for example, on my Moonblade, I'm going to probably lean more into those lucky hits and trying to hit higher attack values. And then, if I don't have anything else, maybe I do lean a little bit into the crits as well. To be more specific, the left side here is going to be made up of orange and red circles. Now the orange circles are just buffs that do different things and give you different effects, whether it be like more stats or that's where you get the healing one. And the red ones are going to be like a kiss curse mechanic, and in fact they are called curses. So they're going to give you some very powerful buff, but also give you some negative side effect, usually the cost of HP. So that's part of the reason why you do definitely want a support for these activities. Now, there is one that I deem to be pretty important, and that is the gravitational black hole. Now, if you know what the Tempest Ogre does, it's more or less a version of that anybody can grab. However, I really would recommend that at least your tank grabs this. And the reason why is because a lot of things that will happen are going to be like, they need to be near the mob and it's going to pull them in. And so if you combo the black hole with things like, anything standing within 10 meters takes 10% more damage or whatever, those kind of buffs are going to be a lot easier to combo if you're a tank, because you can also get one that's pretty unique to tanks, and that is the Throne of Domination. It's actually a curse, but it grants you super armor but reduces your movement speed by 40%, and it casts taunt every 10 seconds. So when you combo this super armor with the black hole, you're not getting interrupted, and you can go for other effects that allow you to add vulnerability, like I said, to enemies within 10 meters and stuff like that. So any of these kind of effects where you're pulling everything in just kind of play into that role of your tank pretty easily. Another one that I think is going to be pretty universal is going to be the Blood Pact Curse. So it increases attack by 50%, but each attack consumes 2.5% HP, and then at 1 HP, all healing is nullified, so you're likely going to die. However, that 50% attack does work even for magic attack or intellect characters. And so I highly recommend going for this. This is something that's going to just increase everyone's damage across the board. Every character should do this as long as you have a healer in your group. And then specifically for healers is another one called Sacred Flame Strike. When healing a target, deal damage to enemies around them equal to 200% of the healing potency. Now, I originally started to go for a luck-based crit build on my attacks, you know, trying to slowly build up my attack, and that was doing okay. But as soon as I got this and started healing, it actually increased my damage significantly. So this is definitely one that I would recommend any healer get, or realistically like anyone who can heal. So, you know, if you're a dissonance or whatever, but especially if you're like a life binder, it's gonna help you do a lot more AoE damage when you're gonna be healing, and you're gonna need to be healing because there are some bosses especially that do a fair bit of damage, and so you want to be able to keep your team up. And plus, like I said earlier, a lot of these effects actually take HP, so you definitely do want a healer, and you do need to be healing off. So this is really gonna increase your damage. I'm not kidding when I say my damage increased by like 15 to 20 times when I took this spell. So your mileage may vary depending on what kind of healer you are, but it's very potent, and I highly recommend healers take it whenever possible. Forgot to mention the lady on the left in the back wall, she actually has the ability to sell you stats. So if you want to increase your haste or your mastery or whatever, you can go ahead and just buy them from her. Now, when it comes to the rewards, the way that the rewards work is you actually get rewarded for destroying all the mobs in these different waves. You want to be as lethal as possible. All these different abilities that I mentioned are going to help you do that, right? Help you pull them in, group them together, and AoE them down and get yourself the most amount of rewards. But this also helps you get more coins, which then helps you get more power. And so in general, it does start to snowball. The stronger you are, the more mobs you're going to kill, and then you'll end up getting more rewards. So that is kind of the entire gameplay loop. The bosses are realistically there to kind of stop you and make sure that you're meeting certain like damage checks. And if you're not, then kind of kick you out and get you to retry. More or less probably just to make you not waste any more time, because if you can't kill those bosses, then realistically you probably don't want to continue with that team anyway. So I don't think that's necessarily too bad, but I will say it does feel a little bit of a bummer when you get a decent build started, but then you have to restart essentially. But it just kind of is the way it is. And realistically, the difference between somebody who's doing good damage in this and someone who's doing bad damage is really, really significant, which is part of the reason why I wanted to talk about these special abilities that I really noticed and felt like were a big contributor to our success. Okay, so now that we've kind of talked about all the things about the event, let's go ahead and talk about the rewards. So if you go into your events here and then you scroll down to the Adept Trials, it'll actually bring you to the Seabreeze store. And there is a lot of good stuff here that we realistically want, but most importantly is these runic alloy shards. Now these shards are to get your tier set gear. So this is going to be really, really important that you get this before we're able to start actually making this gear. Do you have a fair bit of time from when this video will be released? I think it was roughly a week. Just be aware of that and don't stress too hard. It's pretty easy, I think, to get all this stuff. With a solid run, you'll get roughly 600 of these coins, and I was able to buy out a decent chunk of them with that, obviously. So don't worry too much. You could do them all in one day, realistically, if you want to, because there's no limit on how many of these you can do per day. Other rewards that I think are going to be very, very beneficial is going to be this legendary gearbox. So from what we can tell, it does seem like you can actually pick anything in here. And what that does mean is that you can pick a weapon. So if you're multi-classing, like some of us, like myself, for example, my healer is going to be multi-classing with the beat performer. I don't have a legendary weapon yet for my beat performer, so this is going to be a good opportunity for me to try and get one of those. But it's also an opportunity for anybody who's trying to min-max their gear a little bit more. Keep in mind that the master version of the dungeons for Tina's Mine Realm, Goblin's Lair, and the Ruins are all going to be coming out in roughly 3 days or so from the time of this video. And those are going to have specific pieces of loot that are going to be available at level 60. So I wouldn't recommend that. So personally, If I was going to open some of these, I would be going for weapon, boots, arm, and then the different bracelets, because those are going to be the pieces of loot that you actually get from the last 3 dungeons, and those aren't going to be available for the master version for another week or even a bit longer. So just keep that in mind and try and target the gear that you need most. Of course, if you actually need any of these pieces, or you have a piece that doesn't have very good stats or whatever, I think it's definitely worth going in and re-rolling the piece, especially because, like I said, you can farm this as much as you want and you can buy 30 of these chests. You have a lot of opportunities to get some decent gear. Take advantage of it. Well, hopefully this video was helpful and gets you off on the right foot with your Adept Trials. It's actually relatively easy. However, it is easy also to get stuck. So don't stress it too much. Enjoy it. Have fun. These kind of randomized events are just the way that they are. You know, sometimes you might run an entire run without seeing the gravitational pull, for example, and that's going to significantly hamper your progress. You're going to have runs like that. Don't worry about it. Enjoy it, and, you know, just play around with it, right? So if you guys like the video, please like the video down below. If you have a comment or anything you want to discuss, you know, feel free to drop a comment down below. I always read all of your comments and most of the time interact with them as well. If you guys could subscribe to the channel, I would greatly appreciate it. We're getting closer to 500 subs on YouTube, and that's a really cool milestone that we're trying to hit. So thank you guys very much for that. Thank you for your support, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.